Exploring a cave is a lot like flying in an airplane. When you're flying in a plane, you trust the airline to keep you safe. The staff is trained. The pilot, it's not their first time flying. The equipment goes through multiple safety checks. There are evacuation plans and safety procedures that the crew warns you about. And most importantly, if there's bad weather or something goes wrong, both you and the airplane stay on the ground. So it might not seem like it's inherently dangerous, but if you think about it, if something goes wrong, your life is on the line. The defendant, Cave of the Breezes Expeditions, has a cave exploration business. And its customers trusted that business to keep them safe. Max Petunia, the plaintiff, was one of those customers. Now, Max was a teenager with a bright future ahead of him, on the cusp of his professional hockey playing career. All that changed on April 30th, 2017, when Max had the misfortune of visiting the defendant's business. Now, it was supposed to be a fun day of bonding, a quick 2-3 hour tour, a way for Max and his teammates on his hockey team to come together. The old players, the new players, a bonding trip with their coach, a trip that the team takes every year. Now, imagine you're watching Max and his teammates. They arrive, they're really excited. They meet their tour guide, Cindy Cooney. She gives them a brief lecture, and then they enter the cave. And then Cindy abandons them, saying she forgot her safety pack. Max and his teammates are standing there waiting, when suddenly they feel a rumbling. And then, just like that, the entrance to the cave is covered in mud. Max and his teammates are trapped inside the cave, just steps from the entrance, just steps from outside where they had been moments before. Max and his teammates were trapped, not for 1 day, not for 2 days, but for 3 days inside that cave, with little food or water and no way to communicate with the outside. They had nothing to do but wait and worry. Now, meanwhile, outside the cave, the defendant is scrambling, trying to come up with a plan, trying to figure out what to do and a way to get Max and his teammates out. Eventually, they come to rely on this experimental, untested robot technology from Howard Sent. Now, who is Howard Sent, you may ask? A total stranger to the defendant, someone who just happens to come along and has this technology. So they decide to use it, and it goes into the cave and takes Max's teammates out one by one. Now, Max is the last one to be rescued, and when it's his turn to go inside this pod, it's a very tight space. Imagine it's almost like being inside an MRI. Max can't see where he's going. It's complete darkness. And while he's inside and expecting to leave the cave, suddenly the robot starts malfunctioning, twisting and turning, and breaking and crushing Max's arms and legs in the process. Max trusted the defendant's business to rescue him, and now Max may never play hockey again. So we'll prove to you that it was the defendant's negligence on April 30th, 2017 that led to the cave-in and caused Max's injuries. And as the plaintiff, we have the burden of proof to prove that claim to you by a preponderance of the evidence. Now, all that means is, as you hear the evidence, you have to think it's more likely than not that our claim is true, that it was the defendant's negligence that led to Max's injuries. Now, just like in real life, there are some facts you'll hear that could go either way, somewhat of a gray area. But overall, as you hear the evidence and compare the two sides, you just have to find our claim just a little bit more believable than the defendant's. Just 51% if you think of a scale. And as you hear that evidence, there are 2 points I want you to keep in mind. First, this cave-in was foreseeable. And second, the defendant never should have been open that day. Turning to my first point, this cave-in was foreseeable. You'll meet our expert witness, Dr. Cross. a geologist and renowned cave expert. You'll hear that there are warning signs that precede a landslide: heavy rain, high precipitation, fallen trees, and you'll hear that there was even a cave-in at this exact same spot many years ago. You'll hear that the defendant's business, Cave of the Breezes, and its owner, Bobby Daly, observed and ignored these warning signs. You'll hear that there was fallen trees even on the morning of April 30th. And that brings me to my second point. Bobby Daly and Cave of the Breezes saw and ignored these warning signs. They never should have been open that day. You'll hear that Bobby Daly takes a very hands-off approach to running his business, relying on luck rather than common sense. You'll hear that Bobby Daly has a pattern of bringing in experts to rely on because he doesn't know how to run the business himself. His head tour guide is someone who he inherited from the previous owners. He relies on his inspection company to tell him whether the land is safe or not. He relies on Howard Sent at the end to rescue Max and his teammates. But you'll hear that on April 30th, with all this rain and fallen trees and all these warning signs, Bobby Daly didn't bring in an expert to certify that Cave of the Breezes was safe to be open. So then you'll hear that when Max and his teammates were trapped, the defendant had to scramble. He had to rush and get Max and those kids out, and it was a botched rescue job. You'll hear that this robot technology was experimental, untested, and malfunctioned, injuring Max. And you'll meet Max himself. He'll take the stand and he'll tell you how those injuries continue to affect him today. So those are the 2 points I want you to keep in mind as you hear the evidence. The cave-in was foreseeable, and Cave of the Breezes never should have been open that day. And we'll prove to you that that negligence led to Max Petunia's injuries. Thank you. Good morning, Max. Can you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Yes, my name is Max Petunia, and I play semi-professional hockey for the Pitbulls.
Now, Max, I want to talk a little bit about your background and what happened on April 30th, 2017. How old were you on that day?
Well, that day was actually my 18th birthday. So.
And did you go to college, Max, before you started playing hockey?
No, I decided to go straight from the junior team on the Pitbulls into the senior team.
Do you remember what you did on your 18th birthday, April 30th?
Yeah, that was the Cave of the Breezes trip, and so we came up the day before, but that was the day of the trip.
Okay, and can you describe what it was like once you arrived at the location for the trip?
Sure. When we arrived at the location, there was some light rain, but the thing that really stuck out to me is it looked like we were the only group there. There are no other groups around.
Okay. Now, Max, did you meet anyone once you got there?
Yeah, so after we got off the bus, they gave us this safety warning, tour guide warning. I think the tour guide's name was Cindy. She walked us into this cave, and then she gave us sort of a generic warning.
And what do you mean by generic warning?
Yeah, so she basically, when she gave this warning, she seemed like she was nervous, sort of stumbling over her words, and the warning was essentially, in the event of emergency, stick together.
Now, what happened after you met Cindy and she gave this brief warning?
Yeah, so after Cindy stumbled through her words, she mentioned that she forgot her emergency pack and she left us alone in the cave.
Okay. And then can you just describe what happened after that when you were alone in the cave?
Yeah, so it must have been just moments after she sort of walked out of the cave. The entire front wall where we came in through the cave started coming down. There was this loud rumbling, and then all of where we entered was completely covered.
Now, I'll revisit that in a moment, Bax, but right now I just want to rewind a little bit and talk about your expectations before you went on this trip. Can you tell the jury why you went on this trip?
So this trip, this is a trip the team does every year, and it was sort of part of a team bonding exercise. And I was just looking forward to using this trip as a way to transition on to the senior team and get to meet other team members. And I was really excited about that.
And Max, have you ever been in a cave before?
Before that, no, that was my first time going in a cave.
Okay. Now, before you went on the trip, did you or the team have to do anything to prepare?
Yeah, so in order to go on this trip, a few of us were underage. We had to sign a waiver form, and I think I eventually got my mom to sign that waiver form for me.
Now, did you review that form?
I did, yes.
Did you talk to, besides your parents and your teammates, did you talk to anyone else about the trip?
Yeah, so I was pretty excited to talk to my mom about this trip. Of course, told her she had to sign this form for me, and then I talked to my grandparents about this too, and they mentioned that in the same cave about 50 years ago there was a cave-in.
And how did you feel after hearing that story?
Well, it was a pretty awful story. There was, something like 30 people were trapped in that
What would you
cave.
say to a hearsay objection to this grandparent's story?
Assuming we're outside the presence of the jury, if allowed to testify, the witness will say that his grandparents told him about this prior cave-in, and it's not hearsay because it's putting him on notice as to possible risks involved with going on the cave-in.
Why is his notice relevant to this case?
Your Honor, the defense has offered the affirmative defense of assumption of risk by the plaintiff, so this goes to that point, establishing whether or not plaintiff had sufficient awareness of these risks.
So you're offering this to help prove the defense's point that he was aware of the risk.
Not to the extent that he assumed the risk, that it was a dangerous activity. If allowed to testify, the witness will say he heard the story but didn't think much of it because of the long time frame that had elapsed since that cave-in. Max, you may continue. I can repeat the question. Can you describe to the jury how you felt after hearing this story from your grandparents?
Objection, relevance.
Yep, we've already gone through it.
Yeah, so it was a pretty awful story. Mentioned that a bunch of people got trapped in this cave and ended up dying, but I thought that was 50 years ago, so I wasn't really too worried about it.
No, Max, when you met your tour guide, Cindy, you said she was stumbling.
Yes.
Can you describe in more detail what you meant about that?
Yeah, so she just seemed sort of nervous, and her presentation as a whole on the warning was kind of all over the place. She just didn't seem like very confident in the information she was presenting.
And how did that make you feel?
Objection, relevance.
Counselor?
Assuming we're heard outside the presence of the jury, if allowed to testify, the witness will explain how the defendant's employee's nervousness made him nervous, but ultimately how he trusted the defendant to safely guide him into the cave.
And why is that relevant?
That's relevant to his state of mind on the day in question, and again, going to the whether or not there was sufficient assumption of risk, Your Honor.
What fact necessary to an element of a claim raised in this case is made more or less likely as a result of his feelings about what he perceived about the defendant's employee?
Well, as to assumption of risk, this will help establish how he felt in regards to trusting the defendant and trusting the safety of going into this cave.
how does his trust of the defendant make it more or less likely that he assumed the risk of injury?
Well, if allowed to testify, the plaintiff will say he still went into the cave, so establishing that he was nervous but still trusted the defendant.
So it sounds like you're trying to prove the defense's defense for them by saying he went into the cave anyway, despite thinking he might get hurt because the other person may not be very good at this.
To a degree, Your Honor, I actually believe that this testimony will come out and will explain it in closing, but this will establish that the assumption of risk wasn't strong enough. Yes, he was a little nervous, but he still felt safe enough to go with the defendant's employee into the cave.
All right. Well, I mean, it sounds relevant. So whether it's relevant in the way that they want, I'm not sure, but that's not the standard. So we'll allow the testimony.
Next, you may continue. So how did you feel after having this interaction with Cindy, the tour guide?
Yeah, so I was certainly a little nervous, but I trusted this tour guide that she was going to be able to do her job.
And Max, what was the weather like on April 30th?
It was raining a little bit, but I remember it was not raining as much as it was the day before.
By day before, you mean April 29th?
Yeah, that day we took a sort of a bus up to where the caves were, and I just remember it was raining a lot.
Okay, now Max, I want to talk about the landslide itself and the aftermath. So can you describe what it was like in the cave right before the landslide happened?
Well, this is a beautiful cave, and as we were sort of the entrance was, it was nice, but then exactly whatever all the team said, it was, it was picturesque, all of these other things. So that's what it was like right before. There was a main entrance where all this light was pouring through, and then this loud rumbling, and that whole entrance came down.
And Max, can you describe how you felt after the landslide happened?
It was terrifying. This was a trip that we were supposed to be a team bonding exercise, supposed to have fun, and completely trapped in this cave.
Now, Max, did you have any supplies with you in the cave?
It was supposed to be a 2-hour trip, so a few of us brought water, a protein bar, but that was it.
Did you have any way to communicate with the outside?
A few of us brought our cell phones, but when that wall came down, they just stopped working.
Okay. And Max, how long were you trapped inside the cave?
They told us it was 3 days, but it felt like a lot longer.
And Max, can you describe how you ultimately got out of the cave?
Yeah, so we were there for 3 days completely alone aside from our coach, no food or water. And then on the 3rd day, there was another loud rumbling. And a lot of us were worried that this was another landslide. But instead, it was this robot that came through the same main entrance that was completely covered.
And can you describe what you did with the robot?
Yeah, so once the robot came in, there was some sort of instructions on how to get in, and so most of my teammates, one by one, they were able to get in and out of the cave through the robot.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to ask the witness to step down and just step in front of the jury to demonstrate his positioning inside the robot pod.
Any objection?
Nope. I would just like to move so I can see.
All right.
Okay, Max, you may step down and just step into the well in front of the jury, please. Okay. Max, can you please just demonstrate and explain to the jury how you were positioned inside the robot pod?
Yeah, so we had to lie down, and sort of these automatic restraints. So you put your body, you lay all the way down, and you put your arms and legs just like this.
Okay. And then what happened when it was your turn inside the robot?
Yeah, so about halfway through the trip, or what felt like halfway through the trip, the right arm restraint it snapped my arm in half, and the left leg restraint snapped my leg in half.
And how did that feel?
It was awful. So this motion felt familiar as a hockey player because this is the type of motion you use for a wrist shot, but as opposed to releasing right here, it snapped all the way around. And it's the same thing in my left leg. This motion as a hockey player is known as a crossover. I'm familiar with that motion, but again, where the tension normally releases, it just completely snapped.
Thank you, Max. You may retake the stand. Now, Max, when you were inside the pod, were there any buttons or any mechanisms to press?
No, it was all automatic. I mean,
Okay. And Max, can you please, it looks like you're walking and your arm's okay today. Can you explain to the jury your recovery?
so luckily enough, I was
What would you say to an objection to relevance here?
Assuming we're heard outside the presence of the jury, if allowed to testify, this witness will explain how, while it appears he's made a physical recovery, he still is suffering from mental and emotional trauma. And just to explain the existence and the severity of those injuries.
So considering this is a bifurcated trial, why is any of that relevant in today's trial?
We're not offering that evidence to establish a dollar amount or the value of those injuries, but rather just the existence of those injuries, because his injury here wasn't just purely physical. There is some lingering and ongoing mental and emotional trauma as well.
And so presumably you still have to prove an element that there were damages?
Yes.
All right, that's the point. All right. You can
Okay.
proceed.
Max, so can you just, explain your recovery to the jury?
Yeah, luckily enough, I was able to make a complete recovery, at least physically, on my arm and my leg, but mentally and emotionally, still suffer from. I'm still trying to recover.
Max, do you still play hockey?
I do. I'm still able. Lucky enough, the Pitbulls still let me play on the team, but my game's not the same anymore. I used to be in front of the net in these small, confined spaces in the game, and I just can't do that anymore.
Objection, Your Honor.
What
This
grows?
is strike. I feel that this is getting into a highly prejudicial and irrelevant.
Well, whether it's prejudicial or not, I'm sure it is, but not in a objectionable way. With regard to relevance, counsel, I'll hear you.
Again, Your Honor, assuming we're heard outside the presence of the jury, Max is just explaining how these injuries still affect him today.
And why is that relevant?
That's relevant as to the existence of the damages in this case.
We've already heard that he suffers some amount of emotional distress. Why isn't that sufficient alone to establish your element of damages?
This testimony from this witness and how it continues to affect him playing hockey, again, just shows the existence of these damages as to how it's affecting his ability to make a living for himself in his profession.
Right, but we already heard that he suffers some emotional trauma, which would then check the box of damages. Why do we need more? Why is this not cumulative then?
I think the jury just needs to hear a little bit more about some of the details involved with these emotional and mental injuries, not just the fact that he has them, but what exactly those are and how they're
So
affecting
this would
him.
then go to the weight establishing the element of damages on the off chance that they may not find that emotional trauma to be enough?
Yes, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Max, do you take anything for these injuries?
Yeah, as a result, I still take anxiety medication as a result of my injuries.
No, for. Good afternoon, Ms. Daly.
Good afternoon.
We want to talk about spring 2017 and some of these warning signs. Now, Miss Daly, when you bought Cape of the Breezes Expeditions, you did your due diligence. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I got insurance for the company, so yeah.
And you talked to your insurance company, correct?
Yeah.
And they made you aware of some dangers or hazards to look out for your business. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And those hazards and dangers they warned you about included earth movement,
Yes.
and trees falling over.
Yeah, the trees falling over would be an example of how the earth was moving, but only if the roots were uprooted.
Now, you're on site every day at your business, correct?
Yes.
And you live nearby.
Yes.
And you're also on the grounds frequently walking your dogs.
Yep, I have 2 dogs.
And so you said that you noticed there were downed trees that winter, correct?
Yes, but the down trees were not uprooted roots. They were
Miss Daly, I didn't ask about what caused the downing, just you said that you saw there were downed trees. Is that correct?
yes, because of the snow.
And you're also aware that there was a tree blocking the main road to Cave of the Breezes on the morning of April 30th, correct?
Yes.
And Ms. Daly, you also said that you noticed there was lots of snow in the months before the landslide?
Yeah, we had a snowy winter. It's like normal around here.
And you said that it was also a wet spring, correct?
Yeah, we got some rain.
Now, Ms. Daly, I want to talk about these annual inspections. Now, when you first purchased Cape of the Breezes Expeditions, you did these inspections on an annual basis, is that correct?
Yes,
So that would be every year.
that's what annual means.
And it costs money to do these inspections, correct?
Yes.
In fact, you think they're expensive. Is that fair to say?
Objection, relevance.
Counselor?
Assuming I'm heard outside the presence of the jury, Your Honor, this witness will testify that she did believe these inspections were expensive, and that goes to showing the jury her reasons for stopping doing these inspections on an annual basis.
All right. Anything else? Overruled, sorry.
Now, Ms. Daly, you agree it costs money to do these inspections,
Yes.
and you think these inspections are expensive.
They cost a bit of money, but it's a business expense.
And you said that the last one was done in 2016.
Yes.
Correct? Sometime in 2016.
Yes.
You don't know exactly when.
Not exactly when, but the landslide happened in 2017, so.
Right. So this 2016 inspection report, it's fair to say you don't have a copy of this report, correct?
No.
And you're also aware that the inspection company doesn't have one either because their record's burned.
I learned about that, yeah. Unfortunate.
So it's just your word alone as to the contents of this 2016 inspection, correct?
Well, the natural disaster of the fire caused that. The fire, which was of the company, caused that. It's not my fault.
But there's no copy of this report because you also didn't retain one, correct?
That's true.
So, Ms. Daly, if the last one was in 2016 and the next one is planned for 2019, correct?
Yes.
So that's 3 years between inspections, correct?
Yes, but the landslide happened in 2017.
Now, Ms. Daly, I want to talk about Cape of the Breezes safety plans. So you said Chase Quinn handled the front of the house, correct?
Yes.
And that involved training the guides?
Yep.
And it was just Chase Quinn alone, correct?
With his 25 years of experience, but yes.
You weren't involved with training the guides.
I don't have 25 years experience.
Right, you only bought Cape of the Breezes a few years ago, correct?
Yeah, about that.
So there are safety policies that Cape of the Breezes has, correct?
Yes.
But you didn't write these policies, correct?
No, I don't have 25 years of experience.
Chase Quinn wrote these policies.
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
May I ask?
What has been pre-marked as the policies? Ms. Daly, I just handed you a document that says Cape of the Breezes policies and procedures guiding and leading tour groups. Is that correct?
Yes.
And this document is one that Cave of the Breezes uses in the course of business, correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, I would like to move into evidence what has been pre-marked as Trial Exhibit B or pre-marked as Exhibit B as Trial Exhibit 3.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
All right, so admitted.
Now, Ms. Daly, I'm going to call attention to certain sections of this document, and I would like you to follow along silently. Now, the very first sentence of this document says, remember, most tour groups are composed of mostly first-time cavers. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
And you're aware Max Petunia was a first-time caver, correct?
I believe so.
Now, jumping down to point 2, the last sentence in that paragraph says, there is never any reason for you as a guide to separate from your group. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
But on April 30th, isn't it true that Cindy Cooney wasn't with her group,
Yes.
right? She was actually outside of the cave with you, correct?
Yeah.
So she was in violation of this policy.
It's because she forgot her emergency pack, so she went to go get it.
Right, but she didn't bring the group with her, did she?
No.
Now, jumping down to point 5, it says, the very first sentence, have an emergency plan and discuss what will be done if something goes wrong. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
And you testified that after the cave had happened, you immediately called 911 and did a head count. Is that correct?
Yes.
But nowhere in this document does it say the word 911, does it?
No, but we can't plan for every kind of emergency, so we just know what to do. We'll figure it out when we figure out what the emergency is.
So your testimony is that there's no plan written in this document for what you do when there's an emergency.
No, it says everyone should wait for instructions from you. So we were trying to figure out what to do in this situation.
Now, jumping down to the last sentence in paragraph 5, Ms. Daly, it says the group must understand that you make the decisions in case of an emergency. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
So when this emergency happened, one of those decisions involved bringing Howard Sutton and his technology into the operation. Is that correct?
Yes, because we had to get them out as soon as possible.
Right. So it was a race against time, it's fair to say?
Yes.
So with this robot pod, you didn't have time to test it?
No, it was his technology.
So you didn't do a trial run of this technology, did you?
We didn't have time because of the time crunch we were in.
Now, Ms. Daly, you said you relied on your insurance company to make you aware of what the warning signs are when you bought the Cave of the Breezes, correct?
They were one of the ways, yeah.
And you rely on your inspection company to do a survey of your land every year, is that correct?
Yes.
And you rely on Chase Quinn for training your staff because he has 25 years of experience, yes?
Yes.
And you relied on Howard Sent for this robot pod.
Yes.
But on April 30th, when you saw the heavy rain and the fallen trees, you didn't bring in an inspection company or do a survey, did you?
No, because we just did one in 2016, and they told us that we had no warnings of a landslide.
Right, but it was sometime in 2016. You can't testify as to when exactly that report was.
Not exactly, but 2016, which would have been like a year before the landslide.
Now, Ms. Daly, it's fair to say that you have no cave business experience prior to owning Cave of the Breezes, is that correct?
No.
And isn't it true that you've never even been inside a cave?
No, I don't particularly like caves.
So you've never stepped foot in a cave at all, let alone been inside a cave for 3 days, is that correct?
No, that's why I knew we had to get them out there, because I couldn't even imagine how terrifying it must have been for Max and the whole team to be down there. So we had to do everything we could to get them out, including using Howard Stent's machine. And that's why they're alive today, is because we used Howard Stent's machine.
And there were no extra food supplies or water inside the cave, correct?
No.
No further questions. Permission to approach the witness to retrieve documents?
You may.